here in the perimeter, there are no stars. Out here, we is stoned.
Hello and welcome. This is the C86 show. I'm David Eastaugh. As you know, we love a special guest. This week it's going to be the turn of the writer, novelist and academic Guy Mankowski, who I spoke to very recently to find out more about life, love, poetry, and also his latest project and book, which is currently something of work in process, because it's on Substack, but hopefully will get printed. It's on the work of the musician Kristen Pfaff, who was in various bands, Janitor Joe, and also Hole, and sadly passed away at the age of 27. But this is the interview, so you're going to find out more about both Guy's work and also the life of Kristen Pfaff. So after several minutes of interesting but casual chat, we get down to the exciting subject of Guy's early formative years. Guy, it's over to you.
Well, I was thinking about this just before we started chatting, and the first time I went to an indie club springs to mind. I was queuing to get into Blazes in Middlesbrough, my first year at uni, and the song that was playing inside the club as we queued in the cold and the rain, and I had a velvet coat on, was Hole's Violet.
Right.
And I remember just listening to it and thinking, what, so you go in this club and you pay £3 and you get to listen to actually good music and what, dance to it and drink? I couldn't believe this idea of an indie club.
Right.
And it was Hole's Violet, which is extraordinary because Kristen Pfaff played on that. So, you know, the short answer is I was a kind of Kurt Cobain, Nirvana, that kind of Smashing Pumpkins. You wouldn't know it to look at me, but that's the truth of it.
That was it, really. And so you were a 90s kid, really?
Yeah, I was a 90s kid, and, you know, I'm, in my head, still kind of reading a Courtney Love trashy biography of her on a beach as a teenage boy. You know, that was the kind of thing I used to do when I was coming of age.
Yes, blimey. Yeah. And the 90s, though, did you ever sort of get to, you know, the narrative of the way that period ran, sort of from the late 80s to Woodstock 99? How did that sort of feel when you saw your generation sort of so brilliantly sort of mature and adult? Did that sort of feel like, God, that started well but went badly?
Well, my Woodstock 99, I went to see REM headline at Glastonbury 1999, and that was the kind of the Woodstock moment for me and my friends. And you know, I went along for that, and I saw Hole there as well, actually, in Manic Street Preachers. And this is how kind of ignorant I was of this music, David. I wasn't a fan of REM. I thought they were like the sort of thing people say about Coldplay now, and it was really magical and it was really beautiful. And that's the moment that the touch paper was lit. And you know, my evidence of that is I find myself going back and watching footage of REM at Glastonbury in 1999, and that was my Woodstock, I suppose.
Yes, I know, that was quite interesting. And then sort of, how did you then become a writer? How did this world? Because you've written a book before, haven't you?
Yeah, I was in a band called Albanova when I was in my 20s, and we had a small record deal, and we chased around London venues for a while, and it didn't kind of happen. And then I ended up doing a career as a psychologist and ended up writing about some of my patients. And that kind of inspired a novel that I had. And really, I was a novelist. And in about 2019, I did a book called Albion's Secret History, which was me kind of mudlarking about through... I was getting a bit tired of all of these books about Oasis and the Beatles and following a sort of one bloodline. And I was thinking, you know, the people that I know that I was in these indie clubs with and, you know, dressing up on weekends and learning to play power chords like I did, you know, we were influenced by the Manics and Long Blondes, and, you know, we weren't influenced by Oasis. We were influenced by literature. We were influenced by J.G. Ballard. So I started writing about music as a result of that. And then this is kind of where things get, I think, for me, a bit kind of mysterious and mythological without wanting to get too pretentious, is I was intrigued by the photo of Kristen Pfaff on the inlay to Live Through This, Hole's album. I used to play Live Through This while I was on my Mega Drive playing Road Rash 3 because I liked the riffs.
Right.
And, you know, that was the kind of the level of my engagement. And I saw that I must have been intrigued enough to have some kind of curiosity about her brother, Jason Pfaff, and I remember donating some money when he'd had a car accident to a fund and thinking, I wonder if there's a book about his sister. What do we know about her? And one day I just sort of light went off in my head. Now's the time to contact him. This feels like the right time. And I'd kind of waited years. And he instantly replied and said, yes, I think you might be the right person, and sent me these MP3s of these huge diary recordings that he'd made, and that was it. I was off, and it was literally based on me being intrigued by a photo of her. I had no idea what I was getting into.
No, well, that's interesting, isn't it? And were you aware of her death in 1994? Did that come on your radar at all?
No, about 1999, Kurt Cobain was coming on my radar, and I remember people would Tipex Nirvana on their rucksacks and write out the lyrics to Teen Spirit. And, I was sort of aware of Kurt Cobain, and I only became aware of people like Kristen Pfaff a bit further down the track, probably about 2001 or something, and people like Richie Edwards, and was sort of intrigued, to be honest, by some of the tragic stories about, that scene, and started to they started to get under my skin, some of those figures. So no, I didn't know about it in '94 at all. No.
Blimey, yeah. So then a photo, which was quite amazing, actually, wasn't it? So then, how did you think? Well, after you'd when did your previous book come out? Was that 4 years ago?
Yeah, it was. Yeah, I think it was 2019. Albion Secret History, and I interviewed people like Gary Newman, who's sort of cast a long shadow for me, had a big influence on me. I found his music really atmospheric, and we actually talked about novels when I interviewed him. He's got all of this science fiction that he hasn't had published, and we did this wonderful interview where during lockdown, Gary Newman is in his wife's spare room surrounded by cuddly toys, and we had a chat for about an hour in which he talked about these science fiction novels and how do I get them published. Not that I felt I could particularly help, but that was a surreal way to have part of lockdown.
Yes.
Albion was part of that kind of stuff.
Nice. So then with Kristen, how did that start to develop once you got this kind of idea, infatuation and communication with Jason?
It's been a torturous journey, to be honest, because when I first heard these tapes, so Kristen recorded these few hours of audio journals, probably when she's between 25 and 27. And Jason kind of sent them to me, and I really did have the impression that Jason hadn't really listened to them. He must have listened to them enough to put them on, to convert them to MP3. And perhaps I'm wrong here. It's obviously a delicate subject, but I felt that what was going on these tapes was very intense, very heavy. She's someone who's struggling with drug addiction. She's at the heart of this scene. For a lot of these tapes she's recording Live Through This, talking about people like Kurt Cobain, Courtney Love. And it was very, very strange, David, because, they were tapes that she made for herself, kind of as sort of therapy, maybe. Some of it is intended as messages she's thinking of sending them to some of her bandmates. But what she's doing is trying to work stuff out, kind of into band crises, where the band is going in terms of feminism, how it sits with her creatively, spiritually. She's very sort of esoteric in how she thinks about stuff. So I sort of reacted to Jason, thank you very much for sending these to me. I'd signed a confidentiality agreement, but it took months and months and months to unpack because, I don't know how many times I must have listened to them. I probably know them off by heart by now, but I was listening to making a note of, well, who's this person and who's that person? Like in any diary, they're not really intended that, well, they're primarily for yourself. There's parts that were in for other people. But I had to then start doing a lot of research and a lot of digging and find out who these people were, contact them, interview them, and get the context, because it was like a blueprint to Kristen Pfaff, or certainly the most sort of primal part of her life when she's in whole. But like a blueprint, you need all of the other details for the blueprint to make sense. So then that began a lot of research, and I interviewed Kristen's mum, Kristen's brother, obviously, some of her ex-boyfriends, really generous, and they got in touch. And I started to make sense of these diary tapes, and I started to unwind what was in them.
Yes, I mean, I know that the good old V&A have just got this. They've got the David Bowie archive that we're going to be able to go and see and access and look at. I mean, did you feel a certain responsibility, or did you want to tell her story, or did you want to archive her stuff, or is it write a book that you've got a focus for?
Well, the impetus kind of evolved. So it was always a book. That was how I pitched myself to Jason. I want to write a book about your sister, and I think she deserves to have a book about her. Then, having listened to what she said, a sort of a sense of responsibility kind of slowly encroached upon me. But if I'm honest, the reason that encroached upon me is as word got out that there might be someone doing a book, and there were these journal tapes from we lived through this era. The amount of interest I was getting from people when people started doing speculative podcasts about what was on the tapes started to get quite overwhelming. And I was sometimes under quite a lot of pressure. Come on, guys, share with me what's on these tapes from people. And, I wasn't prepared to do that. The family had trusted me with these tapes. And as I say, I had a bit of a sense of maybe I wasn't the first to listen to them, but if I wasn't the first, I was the first to really kind of analyze them, certainly. So yeah, then the responsibilities sort of started to get quite heavy and quite pressured. And there's this, I mean, another thing I didn't think I was really getting into at all is I didn't know there was any kind of conspiracy theory about Kristen Pfaff. Now, I have no time for conspiracy theories, and I have no evidence of anything conspiratorial at all. And as Jason has always said, if there had been anything, he would have looked into it. But because it's a difficult subject matter and she died, and there's questions about exactly how she died, and there's all of these rumors about her being close to Kurt Cobain, and he died 6 weeks before. It all became very contested, and I started to find myself kind of actually being the subject of some conspiracy theories myself, which was just bizarre. I'm this guy who was reading whole biographies on the beach on the Isle of Wight. What have I got to do with anything that happened in 1994? But I remember reading a conspiracy theory online that involved me, the Isle of Wight band Wet Leg, and Courtney Love. No, that can't be true. I would have been 14. Someone had kind of claimed that they'd been writing with me when they hadn't, and told a member of Whole that they were writing a book with me and Jason, and we'd never heard of them. Things got really kind of convoluted, and I don't want to take us too far from the music, but that's part of the story that I found remarkable, really.
Yes, because this is only, I say only, it is 30 years ago. So have you found that because what I found doing the C86 show, that with a lot of bands that I started asking for interviews, they were quite happy because a lot of water had gone under that bridge. I don't know, such a cliche, isn't it? But I think most people had what had happened in that intense 5 years. Often it's 5 years had sort of gone, and they'd got on with their life, and things had just generally diluted. So a few people said, well, I probably would have said no a few years ago, but I'm feeling okay about the band and what happened, and sort of have been quite relaxed about it. I kind of felt that their story had been held there since the 80s, and then suddenly he kind of told me what happened,
Yeah.
and they feel quite, I think, quite relieved and pleased somehow that it's there. And I've quite enjoyed archiving all these indie bands that no one's got any interest in, though it slowly has, actually. The 80s, bizarrely, Stump, Big Flame, all those Bogshed, people want to hear them. But yeah, so 30 years. So you haven't felt this kind of like people are letting go of the story and this kind of time in music then?
I think that it's a defining part of my generation's story, what happened around Kurt Cobain in 1994. It seemed like he was the leading light, and to be honest, everyone was basking in it to some extent. I mean, Courtney Love's obviously very close to that nucleus, but I think that a lot of the contestation comes about who can sort of get in that light that is the intense sort of star that's Kurt Cobain. And I do think that people see it as their defining time of their life. So there's people that are exes of Kristen's, and they're now academics, or they'd had careers in music, but you can really see they're picking over the period of time they knew her, or they were in that scene, and still to this day trying to work out what really went on. Asking really fundamental questions about what happened to these people, and the influence of their music, and how they really died, and that kind of stuff. And I have found that quite strange because I've I've found myself being cast in this role as her biographer as a sort of an arbiter, and I don't mean to be. But what you're sometimes doing is you're saying to people, "Hey, you know this stuff? Hi, my name's Guy. I'm from England. You don't know me. You've got no reason to think that I know anything about music, particularly, or your life. But I'm going to ask you some questions about someone who you knew a long time ago that died tragically, that mentions you on her tape." And I suppose the response is a little bit, "Well, who are you to judge me? Thanks for bringing all this dark stuff up, Mr. Englishman." And I've sort of found that that's been my role a little bit. And then you try and appraise what really happened, cobble together the different accounts, but people are hurt and traumatized, and it was the formative period of their life, and it's all very live to them. And I'm not saying people are sort of psychically stuck in that period of time, but it's still contested, definitely. And so that's been part of the intensity of all this, I think.
Yes. And do you want to just give a bit of a background of her life and sort of what was her childhood like? Was that anything different, or
Yeah,
I
really
suppose
unusual. I mean, I think the two things that are really unusual about her is her charisma and her intellect. So she didn't really know her dad that well, and her mum and her were very close. And then she had another dad, Norman Pfaff, who the name comes from, the stepdad. And they had some quite fraught childhood experiences of racing around, living in different parts of America, escaped the Northridge earthquake really narrowly. And then she really shone at school, but she had quite a painful time. She had scoliosis. She was in a metal brace, and she went through these extraordinary phases where she was kind of the cheerleader with the tanning oil at one point at high school. Kind of like everyone loved her, and she got a prize for being the funniest person. But then took a dark turn into this sort of gothic phase, and was a real sort of autodidact. So Jason gave us these essays that she wrote when she was at school, and about kind of Marx and Engels and philosophy. And she's kind of really intellectually tussling with and confronting her tutors. She's obviously incredibly smart. And then she went to Amsterdam, got secretly married to a man, and didn't tell her family about it. And it was a disastrous sort of short-lived marriage. And that was quite painful for the family that was kept secret. And then I think really reacted to that with a kind of heavy boots sort of feminist sort of reaction of, I'm not going to let a man kind of leave me how I felt after this marriage. So took this dark turn into sort of goth and indie, and taught herself how to play the bass.
yes. So what year did she get married?
I'd have to check that off the top of my head. I could find out quite quickly.
Yes, I just wondered because she was born in 1967, wasn't she? So I do believe.
Yeah. Do you want me to just look that up quickly?
Yes, have a look. We love details. Well, it's just always interesting because during that period, I mean, going to Amsterdam now probably doesn't seem a big thing, but if it was the 80s, it was quite, traveling was still quite relatively exciting thing. In this country, we'd have the 1 month rail pass card that you could go to as many countries as you wanted for about £120. Yeah. So when was her marriage?
Yeah. It was within that time period you've described of the kind of the free travel. Yeah, that's exactly what happened.
Oh, right. So she did the whole sort of student rail card. Oh,
Well, she went back. She went back to Europe with Janitor Joe quite close to the end of her life. So yeah, she did a few kind of jaunts around Europe. But yeah, then having taught herself how to play the bass after this marriage, she joined a few kind of performance art bands, and she was in this cult band Janitor Joe, sort of heavy, sort of industrially minded band. And then she was spotted in a club by Courtney Love and Eric Erlandson. They recruited her into Hole. They had to really persuade her to do it.
yes, but
So it was all
was her period with Janitor Joe? Was that during? Was she living in Minneapolis at that stage?
Yeah.
Was it Minneapolis? So that was the home of people like Prince and obviously Husker Du as well. So what was her? You mentioned the goth bands. Was she into any other kind of scenes at that stage in sort of the 80s?
Yeah, massively. She was into the queer rights movement, and she was into the gay rights scene. And her boyfriend Mike went to protest to do with that, and she was a big part of the performance art scene. In fact, her ex-boyfriend Mike was close to members of Mercury Rev and that kind of whole scene. And sort of ironically, and I suppose tragically enough, Kristen didn't really want anything to do with them and said, "Oh, get me away from these people. You know, they're taking heroin. I don't want to be a part of this." And then obviously we know what happened with her. But yeah, she was when she was at university as well. She was she wrote a lot of journalism and she did a lot of activism. And she was a kind of a star of her student papers. She helped stage a protest in favour of more women's safety, more women's rights on the campus, and along with a load of other activists, changed the policy of the university that's still in place to this day. So she was in performance art scenes, music scenes, queer rights scenes, activist scenes. She was really kind of burning the candle at both ends, I think.
Yes, absolutely. God, the 80s, we loved it, didn't we? It was a radical time. We were very angsty in the 80s, weren't we? Because we had sort of, obviously we had the miners' strike, we had the Falkland crisis, and then Red Wedge and all that, rock against racism stuff. So yes, there was a lot to get annoyed about. So yes, I'm pleased that she sort of travelled around Europe at that stage. I mean, I don't know why, but it makes me smile that she had a spirit. She had certain spirit about her.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's absolutely right. And I don't think any of this project would work if she hadn't. I mean, yes, it's testament to Jason having archived her and kept all this stuff that we're using, but she's bursting out of all of the materials. She's bursting off the tape. And, you know, when she's recording these tapes, she's smoking, she's drinking, she's sometimes injecting. It's sort of 3 a.m. This is someone who's kind of ready to burst out of their shell, intellectually, physically. The ways in which she's pushing herself creatively and trying to express herself. She had a real kind of feminist manifesto. I think one of the reasons she joined Whole is she saw it as an outfit by which to progress women's rights. Well, genuinely, she'd been this activist and she had actually changed things at her university. It hadn't been someone who just liked holding a placard and being a nuisance. She'd actually genuinely changed things. And on her diary tape, she really agonizes, how can I use Whole as an outfit to be inspiring to women? And one of the things that's absolutely remarkable, you know, I'm obviously a male biographer, is just how many women from around the world, Brazil, Spain, Russia, you know, I've made good friends with them, and some of them become translators or archivists or researchers on the project, have told me about how much she's inspired them. I had someone yesterday saying, you know, this book has got me, this project, I Know How to Live, this biography Jason and I am doing, has got them through a real dark patch. I find that absolutely remarkable. There's something about her energy that does cut through these materials. It only works with that component of her, and it only works if Jason has all these ways of conveying them to a biographer like me, and then it only works if they come out in the biography. And what I wanted was a beautiful, glossy, hardback book in Waterstones. You know, I wanted to sort of have that kind of on my bookshelf. What we've got is a Substack with her demos and her journal tapes, but that does capture her colour much, much better. So it's funny how things work out.
That's quite weird, isn't it? So did that take a lot to leave Minneapolis and Janitor Joe? I mean, that sounded like that project was going quite well. And obviously, you know, she must have felt very happy or at least familiar with her surroundings. Was it a big transition to move to Seattle?
She really wasn't sure about it at all. And I'm not sure she ever was totally convinced it was the right move. And her family tried to persuade her out of it to some extent. The guitarist and singer from Janitor Joe had given up his PhD studies, and that had been part of his commitment to the band. And so Kristen felt guilty, kind of, to use her mother's words, forsaking Janitor Joe. So yeah, she was really organised about it, and she wasn't sure about it, and she had to be really, really persuaded to be in Whole. And she first of all saw it. You know, we talk about this in the tapes in her biography as a sort of a vacation, going and auditioning with Whole, kind of like a laugh, like, well, yeah, okay, let's see what you have to offer, but really not convinced at all. And I think in many ways, Whole was the most kind of vital project for her, and it's in many ways what obviously people know of her and made her kind of iconic. But I think Janitor Joe was a big part of her heart, because she would talk about how the $25 royalty check she got from Janitor Joe meant much more to her than any other royalty check. So, yeah, really agonizing decision for her and everyone around her, yeah.
Yes. So, what was the state of Hole at that stage? Because they'd already got their first album out, Pretty on the Inside, wasn't it? So there was a big kind of personnel change in the band. How did she get connected and, with Courtney at that point? How
Well, I
did they
think
get to meet?
my impression is that Eric kind of led it and saw her live and persuaded her, and Courtney came on board, but they decided that she was the right person. Hole had put an ad out about wanting, in inverted commas, a whore from hell, which isn't really what I think Kristen Pfaff perhaps was. But she was a really musically accomplished bassist. So for the first time, I'm not trying to denigrate anyone else, but I think for the first time you've got a kind of classically trained musician in the midst. She played. I shouldn't have skipped over this. The reason she learned how to play the bass so quickly is she played cello at high school and performed in front of the whole school.
Right.
Her mother was a piano teacher and she'd been classically trained. So when you have her in the band, everything's sort of elevated to another level. Courtney Love and Eric Erlandson, for all their talents, probably don't have that kind of classical chops, or Patti Shamel either. So then what happens is there's all of this pressure to suddenly, not suddenly, but quite soon start recording Live Through This. And Kristen brings a chorus from Limited Edition, one of the Janitor Joe songs that becomes one of Hole's hit singles, and brings a riff in that's one of the songs on Live Through This. And her creativity, I do think, really kind of elevates the band. Band members of Hole have said the band really clicked when Kristen joined. So Hole go to another level. I would personally think, I don't know what you think, David, but I think Live Through This is a few levels up from Pretty on the Inside,
Yes, well, yes, there is a progression, but there's a big kind of change of personnel as well. And what was the state of everybody at that stage? What's I mean, in terms of sort of, I don't know, their lives, was it a bit of a messy state? How was Courtney at this point in her life?
I think the big thing that springs to mind when you ask me that is it's Kurt Cobain who is setting the pace. Hole get a deal with Geffen to match the terms that Nirvana had. Nevermind is absolutely huge. Courtney Love had dated Billy Corgan from the Smashing Pumpkins. They're becoming huge with Siamese Dream. And the idea is, how are we going to operate on this level? We've achieved our credibility with Pretty on the Inside. I think Kristen was pretty nonplussed with Pretty on the Inside. And the idea is we're now going to be melodic. How can we be melodic? How can we be catchy, but how can we be heavy? But how can the lyrics really say something as well? So the pressure's on commercially, the pressure's on for Courtney to kind of compete with her husband. Competing with Kurt Cobain is no small thing to do. And there's a kind of a furnace of creativity that's going on as they're going in to Live Through This. So no wonder she was staying up till 3 a.m. recording diary tapes, perhaps.
Yes, and was it generally, from what you've gathered, the session, the sort of compositions and the sort of getting the music together, was that generally a good period for the band? Did they kind of gel as a sort of unit and work well as a unit? Because often bands have a honeymoon period where they had a good session here, but then another album, they could feel that this wasn't going to work well. This was going to be their last album, so to speak. So from sort of all these interviews. So I just wondered what the atmosphere was like and how the band brought material together.
Well, I think that there's a case of everything being thrown into the pot. I mean, I can only sort of tell you what I've gleaned from the diary tapes and the people I've interviewed. But Kristen's bringing lyrics, she's bringing riffs. I think her and Patti clicked really well. So the producers who we interviewed for this book said, we never had to patch in anything that Kristen did. The first takes that she did was so strong. There was sort of this creativity pouring out of her, and it's such a tragedy she didn't get to record more. So the rhythm section clicks. I think that Courtney Love is bringing these really interesting lyrical vignettes and stories to the mix, and the producers kind of quipped to them in the studio, dark story of despair are we going to be recording today type thing. So lyrically, it's really strong, and they're pushing Courtney Love quite hard. There's a point where one of the producers sort of asks her about some of these lyrics and could they, be adjusted at all. And Courtney says, "You're not my English teacher," and the producer said, "That's exactly what I am." They're kind of really pushing it lyrically. They're pushing it musically. You've then got the production-wise, the templates from Kurt Cobain and Billy Corgan. There's this drum map that was found, which was a drawing via Billy Corgan about how to set up the drums. And the producers had to push back at Kurt Cobain when he came into the studio and say, "We are not making the sort of record you think we should make. Sort of back off." And at the same time, Kurt's being asked to record some vocals and sort of contribute when they're in the studio. So it's a real furnace of creativity. There's people like Kurt Cobain that are dropping in. And I think, it does really, really click. It starts to congeal quite quickly, though, because Kurt and Eric Kristen and Eric have a relationship, and then they break up, and so it gets quite toxic. So you've got that going on, as well as recording this really dark material.
Blimey, God, that is kind of tricky, isn't it? That's never good for a band, is it? That is never. And did they ever tour, by the way? Did they manage to ever go on the road?
Yeah, they did, and they came to England, and Kristen took her mother, who sort of joined her on this trip. They came to the Phoenix Festival at Stratford, and then they did a tour. They did a tour of quite a lot of America. They did some European dates. So it wasn't a huge tour, but Kristen did European dates, American dates.
So the album comes out in early '94, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And then sort of what happens to her then after that? I mean, at this stage, is there an awareness that she's in some sort of difficulty in her life?
Well, I think what happens is Janet Pfaff, Kristen's mum, is contacted and told Kristen's had to go to hospital. And it's the first they hear that she has a heroin problem. So one of the things that was unearthed during this book is, and Patty Schemmel touches on this in her biography, but Kristen had taken heroin before. And a friend who's kind of been a big part of the story was persuaded by Kristen to get her heroin years before. But Kristen was very good at hiding it. I don't think there's such a thing as a recreational heroin user in the sense that it's sort of so addictive. But if there is one, she was that. They very occasionally do it, and Kristen didn't fit any sort of stereotypes and was very good at hiding it. And I think what happened is they were recording Live Through This, and the heroin became a problem again. They would be touring on the road with people like My Bloody Valentine, who they got quite close to, and they'd be partying, they'd be taking ecstasy. The crystal meth came into the studio at one point. But they finished recording Live Through This, and she's addicted to heroin at that point. And Kristen's mum flies out to try and stop things escalating. But the big thing that happens, and you've got a real sort of dark spot in the story, is Kurt Cobain dies, and Kristen is devastated, and Live Through This is released shortly after that. So this is all going on in a very narrow period of time.
And did Kristen and Kurt spend much time together? Did they become good friends as well? Did they sort of manage to sort of see much of each other?
Well, different people tell me different things. So for the sake of clarity, our source within Whole strongly contests that and says no, they weren't close. And other people say that they were, and I'm inclined to bow towards the people that were in Whole who say that. I mean, certainly who say that they weren't close, but Kurt Cobain did give Kristen a copy of Patrick Susskind's novel Perfume, and other friends of hers have told me that Kurt Cobain gave her other gifts as well. But you've got to verify all this stuff, so that's kind of a bit up in the air.
Yes.
So that's one of the contested spaces, but our source within Whole has absolutely no time for those rumours.
Right, my God. Well, he loved that book, didn't he? Perfume. I've heard many
Have you read
things.
it?
Yes, I've heard an interview with him talking about how he loved that book. What's his favourite one?
It's an
Yes.
amazing
So
book. It's incredibly powerful. It's almost the kind of towards the end, it's almost like a fever dream. Like it's disgusting book and it's really misanthropic, but it's an incredible piece of writing. It's a strange gift to give someone.
well, yes, absolutely. So when unfortunately when he dies, I mean, how does Courtney deal? I mean, she must be absolutely having sort of been the band leader, having the husband and the father of her child kill himself. I mean, I can't believe how she could navigate that part of her life either. How is Courtney at this stage?
Um, I don't pretend to sort of have an understanding of her psychology, and I've not met her. I don't sort of feel I could speak to that with much authority. I think that, like you say, there's just no what possible guidebook is there for how to navigate that. So people take issue with how people react, or say they should have reacted this way, or they've done this and that's right, that's what they should have done. But I just can't imagine how you would deal with that and be at the eye of the storm. Do you know what I mean?
Yes, absolutely. I
And
mean,
I've
just
gone through different sort of frames of mind about it, but I suppose I'm not that you're asking me to, but I'm sort of keen not to be judgmental because um, how would you navigate that?
no, it would just yeah, I don't know. It would be hard to function, but well, for for someone as delicate as me, but yeah, I know it's just extraordinary how people deal with this stuff. So then, is there any mystery to her sort of dying? Was there any sort of contested kind of story to this, or was it just quite straightforward?
Um, we don't have a toxicology report to conclude exactly what went on. Um, I kind of unpick it a bit towards the end of the book, so I don't want to be sort of too laborious about it. But I think that the headlines are she got herself clean, and this is one of the incredible things about Kristen Pfaff. They say that Anthony Kiedis talks about this in his book, sort of Scar Tissue. Um, they say in these recovery meetings, 10 of you that are addicts here, 2 of you are actually going to get clean, and maybe a couple of you are going to die. Kristen didn't just get clean, she got herself clean. The insurance didn't cover her, even though she was in this, major label band. And she then has heroin in her system on the last night that she's in Seattle, planning to move back to Minneapolis. She's planning to leave whole. She's got other outfits that are on the go. This band Palm, which some demos of theirs, which we've shared on the Substack, and her tolerance would have been really compromised because she got clean again. So
Yes.
that's the kind of the headlines of it.
Was she? Did you say she was planning to leave Hull at this stage?
Yeah, she was planning to leave Hull and go back to Minneapolis, and the Seattle scene. Kurt Cobain had died. It was all very dark, and she definitely wanted out. Yeah.
Blimey, God, that is such a tragic
Yeah,
story.
yeah, she had a few. She had a few kind of creative projects lined up, and yeah, we found these incredible things in the archive as well. There's this demo where she sings, and she's written these lyrics and she sings, and it makes us sort of wonder: would she have been the lead singer in a band, maybe? But yeah, I think she wanted to get back to a scene that was kind of thriving and away from this darkness. And the really tragic thing is, she packed up her U-Haul and she was ready to leave Seattle the next morning and go back, and then she dies with her friend sleeping in the van outside with all of her belongings packed to go home. That's how close she was to getting back.
God, 24 hours. And who was the last person to see her?
Well, you said about what are the questions that are sort of unanswered. We know that her friend Paul, um, in lieu of her cousin, who was a security guard, was asked to go with Kristen to look after her to make sure, I suppose, she didn't get back into something like heroin when she was back in Seattle because everyone was doing it. And I think it was probably him that was the last person to see her, but it's kind of contested. And the problem that we've got is perhaps because people are upset and traumatized and don't want to get in it, or perhaps because there's so much conspiracy theory, there's a bit of a black box there. What you want as a a biographer is a timeline and a narrative, and for people to
Yes.
confirm it. And in lieu of that, what you have is a black hole where books or newspaper articles give you a timeline and they contradict each other. So what I've done in the book, if people are interested, is laid out what we do know and tried to piece together the pieces of the jigsaw. But there are pieces missing, and why people don't want to follow that thread so we can nail that down. The reader may wonder.
Yeah, well, no, it's I guess it's going to be tricky. And how did the band then cope with so much happening in 1 year? You know, two horrendous deaths, but then they've also got this new album coming out, which has got some amazing songs on it. Do they just say, "Okay, that's unfortunate, but we've got a tour planned and we're going to have to get
Yeah,
back on
kind
the
of.
road"?
Yeah, they do. They there's a sort of a momentum behind Live Through This, and then Live Through This is also sort of speaking to the darkness that's gone on as well. But yeah, the band doesn't stop when Kristen Pfaff dies. I mean, again, there's so many tensions in this story, but one of the tensions is she is very influential, but she also wasn't there that long. So, this is the defining period of her life. You and I are still discussing it now, and it's the part of her life where she created this album that's one of the Billboard top 100 albums of all time. But it's all very quick. We're talking sort of months. I mean, volume 1 of the book went up to, I think, the first 26 years of her life. Volume 2 of the book is literally the last year. So there's a whole book just about the last year. That's how much
Right.
is going on in that period of time. It's crazy.
Yes, absolutely. And I mean, have you spoke to any of the members about how that must have felt, sort of replacing their bass player and then sort of continuing on?
Well, that's a complicated question. No, I haven't been able to pitch direct questions and get direct answers. We have had different types of input from whole members and quite a lot of input and other people sort of in that scene. I mean, one of the crazy things that's gone on is Thurston Moore's been following the project and gave us a great quote, and he loved this demo that Kristen made that was released as a part of it, and people that were actually there have contributed towards it. In terms of the ongoing sort of continuous narratives of real deep dive interviews with people, that's been more her exes and her friends and her boyfriends and her family members. When you get into the whole members, yeah, they have contributed in different ways, but not with a sit down interview, if you see what I mean.
Yes, well, absolutely. And and the family members, obviously, they must be still feeling hurt through this period or that period. I mean, but has the project also helped them sort of regain, her legacy or just regain some sort of connection to her as well?
Yeah, this is the strange thing because I don't want to keep banging this drum about I had no idea what I was getting into, but yes, I have heard that it's been helpful. Um, let's say particularly for her brothers mentioned that at times to me, which I've really appreciated hearing. I think also for other people that knew her. So if you're um, close friends with someone and then they tragically die, and it was just during one of those periods where you fell out of touch, and then years later through this project you get the pieces come together, or you hear about stuff that's in her journal. There's been an awful lot of things falling into place for people and clicking, and it being helpful to them in a way that I wouldn't have thought a biography could get near. Do you see what I mean? So there's been a lot of that with just readers that were fans of hers. I've been very surprised. I frankly have been really surprised at how many fans Kristen Pfaff had around the world. There's something about her and her charisma and how she looked, perhaps, and what she did, and something iconic about her and the album she was involved in, where she does mean a lot to a certain type of person. And because there was a kind of a dearth of information about her and these questions about her death, there was a real intense need for people to learn about her. So when someone came along and said, we've got these diary tapes, and by the way, it took a long time for anything to come out. There was a lot of podcasts and hopes there were going to be book deals. We got some kind of major book deals lined up, and then they were pulled at the last minute. So when it finally started to come out on the Substack, there was such a head of steam behind it, and I was really surprised that she meant that to people, and when it has helped people that knew her as well as her fans, I've been quite surprised by that.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, it's kind of interesting doing a book, but also having it work in progress at the time. As a writer, how do you find that? Because would you? I mean, most people just want to do the project and not get influenced by other people, and then at the end say, "This is it. If you like it, great. If you don't, that's it. That's fine." Whereas you're getting constant input and kind of throwing these kind of moments and tensions and walking on eggshells probably. How's that? How do you manage to cope with that? Do you find
Well,
it's a little bit tricky at times?
you're right. I mean, it's at times taken over my life, and at times it's been really, really difficult and upsetting. Like the other week, I had to do another edit of the ending, and for the 27th time going through her last couple of days, it's really difficult. Not as difficult as it would be for someone who knew and loved her, and I'd never met her, but it is sort of very dark, and it has been difficult. You're in this conspiracy field to some extent. You then become a sort of a small piece on that chessboard, which wasn't what I bargained for. Um, I I have found it very strange. And in answer to the first part of your question, I haven't really liked it because I would have liked it to have been a beautiful glossy hardback on a coffee table that I could show my parents and be proud of. And it's not like that. It's on a Substack, which feels quite slippery because you can edit it and you can change it. So that's quite good. If anyone doesn't like what you put, you can tweak it. It's great because you can share the demos and you can hear her voice. You couldn't do that with a book.
No.
But in some ways, it also feels quite intangible. So what's quite good is that there's a genuine community around it, and you don't just, in my previous books, you would read the Amazon reviews or not. You could choose to read the reviews or not. Here, there's a community around it, and so there's lots of things about it that are wonderful. But it's also reached very deeply into my life. I mean, before I did this interview, I was just talking to Jason Pfaff, and two people um, who have been related to the book. Literally at 9 o'clock in the evening, 6 years into the project, someone who wants to translate it into Russian, and someone who's getting in touch saying, "I found these articles about Kristen. Do you want them?" It really is a tapestry that's kind of
Yes.
evolved out of this community.
Yeah. So is it the case then that after 6 years that the book is almost ready to be published?
Well, I think that we've just released the first part of Volume 2, so we're now on the Substack releasing chapters that are about her time recording Live Through This and her journals about that. There's two more parts of Volume 2 to come in the coming months. Then we'll have released that edit of the material that we've got. So in that respect, I'm kind of hoping that what we've got is out there. I've done a TEDx talk on it as well. There's been a lot of work, a lot of material. So at that point, I'm hoping it's out. My agent is keen to get a sort of traditional book deal for it as well. And I know there's certain parts of the world where you can't get on Substack, and they want one as well. The book's done surprisingly well, and it became a Substack bestseller in February. And I think that all makes it more likely that it will be a hardback book. But the reason it wasn't traditionally published wasn't because of a lack of publisher interest. It was because of the complications about clearing the material and publishers not wanting to take on that responsibility and sort of wanting us to do more work on that front. So I think it is pretty likely it could get traditionally published, but there is no contract on the table either.
No.
And I think it's getting more likely, if you see what I mean.
Did you say about getting clearance, or did you say publishers getting tricky about? Actually, I can't quite remember the word, but it sounded like there was something that they were unhappy about or unsure about.
Well, I think I don't really know the answer, honestly, because the amount of interest there's been in it has been absolutely enormous, and you can prove that. I have my own sort of publishing history. We talked about things like Albion's secret history, so there wasn't a problem with the content of the book or how it was written. So my best guess is that publishers were wary because it's so contested, and they're quite risk averse in the publishing industry. So the book had enough publicity that my agent Matthew, who represents people like Alan McGee and all these other people, wants to represent me. And it's been enough that there are various kind of bigger publishers that have been sort of sniffing around and wanting to talk about a book deal, but it just never quite came off. And then in the end, we were just thinking, we've got to get this stuff out somehow. And, so my agent gave me some guidance about how to do it on the Substack. And then it worked because of the nature of the media that we had about Kristen. So
Yes.
I'm afraid that's the best answer I can give on that. I'm not totally clear myself.
No, that's amazing. I mean, you have put in so much work, haven't you? It's been absolutely extraordinary. I mean, it's just been such a labour of love, and your detail that you've gone into about all the. I was just looking at it, like her love of the British cult series, The Prisoner, which was quite interesting as well.
Yeah, that was
Having sort of had to sort of do that in the 80s because people kept banging on about it. I mean, it's just so. It's a shame that it has just not sort of been published yet. I guess it's just a matter of time, isn't it, before it does?
It's not on the shelves of Waterstones, but people can go to iknowhowtolive.substack.com and they can subscribe now. And for the price of a hardback, you can read all of Volume 1 and the first part of Volume 2, and get it all sort of instantly. But no, you can't physically hold it in your hands yet, and I would like that. I really would.
Well, I'm not surprised. I guess you need to have completion as well, don't you?
Yeah, I think you know exactly what makes people like me tick, David. You're absolutely right. I would like that, yeah.
Yes. And I saw the photo on one of her, I think it's the Wikipedia page of her sort of grave. Have you ever paid homage to her sort of resting place?
No, I've not been to the grave, no. People have sent me videos of sort of visiting it. I mean, you'd be amazed at some of the stuff that's been sent. There's been people that have got, and I'm not mocking anyone, but it's just sort of to speak to the remarkable nature of this. People who've said they're channeling her have got in touch. I had a long letter that was sent to my university office. I don't know how the address was found from. There's been some stuff like that that's gone on. You weren't asking a question in that vein, I know, but no, I haven't gone. I haven't gone there yet.
No, God, I guess you. As a sort of person doing this creative project, it must just feel it's kind of almost a bit. Do you feel like it's a little bit out of control at times? Do you feel like being a writer, normally one spends it in solitude, sort of pulling it together and being very focused, whereas this is the amount of interaction seems quite overwhelming. Being able to keep focused at times.
And I think sometimes people, quite understandably, might think, I'm appointing myself as her spokesman, which would be problematic of itself, and also her kind of, publicist. You can be criticised for how you sell this stuff. So there was a bit of criticism at first. We did an interview with a channel that people associate with conspiracy things. Well, the truth is that those were the people that wanted to talk to us, and they have huge audiences, and in those audiences are people that are genuinely fascinated by the life of Kristen Pfaff and want to know more about it. So we did speak to people, and then the criticism at times was, well, why are you doing that? Is this a conspiracy book? What are you claiming? No, we weren't doing that at all. Now I'm speaking much more to history podcasts and people like yourself who really know about music as well. And we're speaking to who we can speak to get the word out about the book. But I'm not her spokesman and I'm not her publicist. But you can sometimes find yourself being seen in that role, or perhaps in fairness, find yourself playing that role. And really, you just want to be the biographer.
Yes.
But we're in an interactive age now,
I know. I think hearing the tapes feel quite strange, though, don't they? Because these are sort of, I suppose, she would have thought these are just private tapes that no one else is going to hear. So getting an insight into hearing them is kind of, it does have a strange vibe at times, doesn't it?
The thing that was really, you're right, the thing that was really odd for me is I think the first few times I heard them, I didn't really process them. I was probably just trying to transcribe them or pick out what was key. Where's Kurt Cobain mentioned? Where's Courtney Love mentioned? I think a few years in, I really started to get the weight of what was going on with these tapes. It's someone kind of fighting to understand what it's like at the eye of the storm, which is where they are, in the heart of this scene, making this album. And then I always remember I was playing one of the tapes in my office, and someone close to me came in, and I could just see the look on their face, like, if you were to walk into a church during a funeral, you would just feel the vibe. You would just
Yes.
go, wow, and you'd respect it, and it would be heavy. I felt them kind of picking up on the incredible heaviness and darkness of her voice. So I haven't listened to them for quite a while now, and I do find that quite strange. How a really sort of fuzzy recorded audio, it would have been on cassette, from 1993, can have that weight to it. It's not even that we know she died; it just has a weight of itself, which is kind of curious. I think she was perhaps a very heavy person, and what she was talking about was very heavy. But it's curious how it can fill a room. I mean, music can do that, can't it?
Yes. And I think it's because it's not at all self-conscious. It's her sort of just talking, just thinking, I guess this is just going to be for my own interest. I'm just, her working through her stuff. But then to have a insight into it, it's a bit like, when people, I suppose, it's a little bit different with reading people's diaries, but even that can feel a little bit like, I'm not sure if I should be reading this because this is obviously a private thing. So this is almost a little bit like, gosh, she's, it's weird, isn't it? It's 30 plus years ago.
But if you don't mind me, if you don't mind me asking, have you kept diaries? Do you have a lot of that kind of? Is there some sort of mother load of David's introspection that could be this?
Unfortunately, I was never one to do that. I'm more of a person who took a lot of photographs. So I go back and I look at photographs from these albums that we've put together, and that's kind of probably how I process the past. And in a way, it's often being surprised. Like, oh God, I'd forgotten that point in my life, and I totally. So in a way, that's how I process the past. But it's not the written word. It's kind of more photographic and just being reminded of things. And so on that subject, it's like I have a narrative of the past, and often, and people have explained it as like you focus more on the negative and the things that went wrong because it's almost a survival thing. But when I look back, I think, oh, actually, that was quite good, that period. I can remember that year where this had gone wrong and we'd had this intense friendship and that had gone wrong and there was some messy stuff over there of your past. But then I look and I think, oh, it's quite different. It's to my memory, but it's like what I'm focused or choosing to focus on is quite the kind of the issues that go wrong, and then that thing of repeating your mistakes just to sort of make it even worse in your life, rather than sort of say, well, that happened, but don't keep focusing on it. I've had
Yeah,
to work on that.
of
I
course,
don't know
no.
if any of that made sense, but
No, it does absolutely. It's fascinating. And now, of course, you could put it all into Chat GBT and say, "What mistakes do I keep making?" Give it 7 lines. Well, I suppose I'm more kind of I've more written it down, and there's part of me that thinks, would Kristen see these recordings as sort of dirty water? Don't go splashing about in that. I'm just venting. Now it's some curious facts, like the fact that she died the way she died, how young she was, how seminal the album became, the fact that people started to follow her, the fact that there was a bit of an embargo about information about her, then that adds this sort of glow to these journal tapes. And then when you say things like, oh, be a bit careful, they're very dark and people might get hurt by what she said, that just makes people more interested, and in fact what you're trying to do is qualify it for what it is. And it's kind of therapy, it's kind of self-soothing. I mean, I would feel very violated if anyone read any of mine, but I don't think that they're that interesting in the sense that they're me trying to work stuff out. How interesting is that to other people? So it has power in terms of Kristen's sort of contextually to some extent. Yes, because she's interesting as a person, but she's at the heart of this scene. She's close to Courtney Love. She's close to Kurt Cobain. I think the thing that really fascinates me is she would have had no idea. She could have had no idea how interesting this stuff was. She didn't know she was going to die. She didn't know the album was going to be big. I think that's the thing that I find really fascinating. All these people that make these, I don't know, recordings or archival stuff. Think of someone like Kafka and the stuff he left behind. Kafka would not have thought, I don't think, people were going to be interested or picking over it decades later. And I think if you do think that, you're probably wrong. People that people are really interested in, I think, are quite dismissive about what they're saying and doing. And it's not that they're not earnest and they're not trying to make an impact, but do you know what I mean? They don't have a sense that, oh, this is sacred, what I'm putting down on tape. So then it's bizarre when others see it as that. You know, I get why, but they would not have seen it that way, I don't think. What do you think?
Well, absolutely. I'm sure they would not have any. They wouldn't have any thought or worry that anyone's going to be listening to it 32 years later. There's just no way. And again, like you said, I mean, the Janitor Joe was the project that obviously she enjoyed, but wasn't going to be massive, and had no idea what was going to happen to the band and that album, and how those songs were going to be met in the world, and what it meant for so many people, and that story of the band as well.
But that's the beautiful thing about art. You know, I don't want to get all cliched about it, but she would not have known it would be on Spotify. She would not have known that it has however many thousands of views on Spotify. She probably would have thought, dare I say it, I'm in a cool band and I love being in this cool band. And she wouldn't have thought that a young woman in Brazil is going to pick up the bass because she's inspired by Kristen Pfaff and then form her own band. I mean, I think she'd have wanted that, but she'd have been blown away if she could have seen this impact. Surely. And the interesting thing as well is the closest you can get to Kristen Pfaff, if you're me, is a woman friend of hers who was her age and in bands as well. And I often sort of say to them, what would she have made of this? And the answer's sort of more complicated. It's, well, part of her would have felt, yeah, I'm interesting, and why shouldn't my story be told? And I've got stuff to say. But another part of them would have been like embarrassed. Why are you raking over this stuff?
Yes.
I don't know about you. I never read the Kurt Cobain journals. It didn't sit right with me. And then with the Kristen Pfaff stuff, we had to really tussle with it, because she does talk about sharing the tapes with certain people, and we think, okay, she's not saying don't listen to them, destroy them. But even when people did, like Kafka, not comparing Kristen Pfaff to Kafka, but Kafka left specific instructions for his stuff to be destroyed by Max Brod, and he didn't. Now, personally, I'm glad Kafka's stuff wasn't destroyed. So you're in a kind of a moral quagmire as well.
Yes, I think Freud did get rid of all his stuff, didn't he? Which was like,
Brilliant.
oh, why did they do that? They should have just kept it. They should have just stuck it in the cupboard for a few, until people passed and said, yeah, I know he wanted it destroyed, but I think his journals or diaries or something like that. But yeah, I mean, that's the material that we're curious about, and sort of what made a person tick, and just going back to that time. And I guess the 90s now look quite a golden decade as well, when every past decade suddenly seems much nicer than where we're living now. It all feels like a complete mess. But then when you go back to any decade, you think, no, there was a lot of mess, and people weren't waking up every morning jumping out of bed saying, this is the great decade, people are going to reminisce about that. No one in the 60s, 70s or 80s ever would think that. And the same with this decade. But I think people look back and go, God, you had all these bands and all this scene, and people are making documentaries.
Well, thing is, I agree with you. It's like that Woody Allen film, isn't it, Midnight in Paris? That whole kind of people wanting to go back to the period of time that was they think they should have been born in.
Yes.
To some extent, I think we're fighting for our identities. I mean, I'm wearing a Smashing Pumpkins t-shirt now. One of the reasons this era is so alive for me is it's when Guy Mankowski, the person, was being most contested in the most febrile way. So you are stuck in it in a way, because you're thinking that was the springboard, and whatever I am now sort of emanates back to that. But I'm really interested. You say, well, everyone just does this about 10 years ago. I worry that there's a bit of a death of counterculture or subculture, and that's why people are still kind of stuck in 90s alt rock a bit. But I don't know, maybe that's simplistic.
Yes. Well, sometimes, I have to just go, But a lot of people, when I do these interviews, often go, yes, but the early 70s, now that was the golden period. I'm not being biased. And it's like, yeah, but you were 16 to 18. And that was I've heard Joe Strummer in 1982 going, I don't know, there's no good music anymore. And I'm thinking, Jesus, the rest of the 80s, you just completely dismissed all those. But he'd become an old man who was no longer able to sort of move with it, and he was
You
just
can't
coming up
say.
with these.
Yeah.
So he
I mean,
wiped out the 80s, let alone the 90s.
well, chat GPT or whatever, they could perhaps pretend to be objective. We can't. We're individuals constructing meaning. So I could argue till I'm blue in the face that the best music was in 1994. I was coming of age then. I'm completely biased. You're absolutely right.
Well, Lemmy,
And I think that. Sorry.
I was going to say Lemmy, who obviously had a lot of thoughts about heroin, but he said, well, the bands I loved was when I was 16, which was and he was the same age as David Bowie, and they would both say Little Richard, Buddy Holly, Eddie Cochran, Elvis Presley, but Lemmy would always say, well, that was that age, I mean, yes, there are great music coming along afterwards that he liked, but you can only be 16, 18 that one period, can't you? And that's the music that means a lot. That you read those lyrics and go, yes, but they really are singing about me. That's me, that is. And
you're right. I had an email from Faris from the Horrors saying, "Oh, I'm really interested in your Kristen Pfaff book." And I was thinking, Faris from the Horrors is really interested in Kristen Pfaff. And then I was thinking, yeah, but you wouldn't look at me and go, "Guy's really interested in." I look like a kind of an academic-y sort of type person. And the only thing that I kind of want to add to what you've just said, because I think it's very wise, is a lot of this stuff. I was really into the whole sort of Joy Division scene for a period of time, and I wrote a novel, How I Left the National Grid, that was set during that. A lot of that, I think, that creativity came out of deprivation. I think Manchester sort of seemed pretty hollowed out and depressed, and the music seemed like a reaction to that, trying to make something meaningful out of that. You're sort of nodding at what I'm saying, which is encouraging. But then I think if you're at a distance, you go, well, that's where it was going on. Factory scene, Tony Wilson, that was like the Renaissance, that whole kind of stuff. Well, that you've got to be careful. You then start applying filters. You had that film which I really loved about Ian Curtis, Control, and it's got that beautiful black and white filter. You've got to be a bit careful making ugliness and deprivation beautiful, I think, because was it really? You've got to be. I don't know if I had a time machine, I'd want to come of age in 80s Manchester. I really don't. If I think,
no, my God, it would be horrendous. You didn't wake up in the morning going, God, this is amazing. People are going to look back and be envious, are they? No one knows.
And then you go, no, I was in a tower block, and there was loads of violence, and there was loads of punks, and you go, violence, punks, that sounds great. Like, no, just stop it. It's not good.
You'd have been on the dole claiming £37 a week.
Yeah.
Living in that. There's an estate called Hume, which people they're photographed, and there's some beautiful books about it. But it sounded horrendous. It was like, you got beaten up, mugged on a regular basis. Your flat they were all squats. But out of that came a lot of the bands, and you go, oh, yeah, all these bands, that must have been great. You had all this squat land, But if you lived in it, you'd have just thought, we got to get out of here.
They can become almost ideological. The more you try and convince someone that something was deprived and horrible, the more they go, oh, it's so authentic. And they're kind of deepening their love of it.
Yes, the gold that was, and for anybody that I was going to say, anybody from that age. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, no, it's fine. I was just thinking, I don't envy Kristen Pfaff and wish I was in a band in that era. Like I think that I interviewed Mickey Brenny from Lush, and it was really fascinating. But the journey, I know you did as well, actually, didn't you?
Yes.
The journey that she'd been on in her band. Part of me always thought, wouldn't that have been the best time to be a music-y type person in bands? And it just sounds awful, a lot of the stuff she's describing.
Yes.
The fact that she was in Melody Maker every week doesn't seem some great consolation if people are being horrible and sexist.
No. Oh, God, yes, I know. Getting your butt bit by the member of the bass player from Blur sounded absolutely horrendous, actually. No, no one. It was lad culture as well. It wasn't good. And she's actually kind of kept talking about that side of it when we've all got a bit like, oh yeah, that must have been amazing. It's like, no, it was the loaded generation. It was disgusting, and it was pretty shallow. And to be honest, most of the music I think is quite lightweight of that Britpop period. Really, you can't. There isn't a substance to it. God, that's a sweeping statement.
No, it's got the Japanese knotweed of irony for me. Is the problem, I like Blur and stuff, but for me, when there's a nudge and a wink, one of the really interesting things about Nirvana is it's just so harrowing. Like there's not a sense of I don't mean it. That's what's so compelling about Ian Curtis as well. There's not a sense of I don't mean it. Like, they mean it too much. I think that, I mean, Kurt Cobain is so interesting because I really get the impression that he conveyed, I didn't work very hard on these lyrics, I just dashed them off. But they are so resonant, I don't buy it, right? He must have worked on them maybe a bit harder. So then the dash becomes the aesthetic, the whole kind of grunge aesthetic. But yeah, I agree with you. The whole kind of let's have a lovely cup of tea stuff doesn't seem to have a lot of substance for me.
No. I mean, I mean, when I look back on that period, I suppose I think, God, I wish I'd been less uptight and had gone to more gigs and had liked different, because it was very tribal in the 80s. I mean, it was like, oh yeah, that's my scene, but that's not mine. And then later on thought, oh, that was so annoying. I wish I'd gone to that gig as well and seen that band and done more gigging, really. But you just do what you can and you just take it all too seriously and become very uptight during the 80s. I mean, it was just very uptight and angsty time. So, but it was fun, at times.
Well, there was an awful lot of I think Kristen Pfaff being one of those people where you wouldn't kind of want to say the wrong thing. She was really sharp, and you wouldn't want to say something that revealed you were biased in this way or the other. I think that's not necessarily a now thing. I think that was part of some activist circles that she was a part of as well.
Yeah.
Is that sometimes how you form your identity, by saying you're not allowed in? I don't know.
Yes. Well, if she born in 67, she would have been that wave of feminism in the 80s, which was, really, there was like reclaim the God, was it the streets or the night? I can't remember. I wasn't there actually, but I remember there was a lot of marches during that period, and obviously a lot of protesting, and people trying to figure out, kicking back against society while we had, the Thatcher government. So it was quite an interesting period.
Well, again, and I think one of the reasons this period is of such fascination to people, I do think it goes beyond people of a certain age were being formed then, is I think there was a sense that cultural resistance could change stuff. I think that died with Tony Blair. Didn't Martin Amis have that quote of, well, he's not much of a reader? He didn't really mind being on the placards and being hated. And I feel that was the death knell of it. Certainly by the time you get to your Boris Johnson's, he couldn't care less what you think about him, however much you protest. But during this period of time with the Kristen Pfaff stuff, the student protesters, they take over the principal's office and they say, we will not come out of the principal's office until we have more security lights for women, more this, that, and the other. And the university does it. And,
yes.
There's hope there. Then you go, if I rally people, if I get people together, and I do believe that is still possible, but the papers would have you believe that it's not. But there's a real sense of hope there that, look, we did change this thing. And I think that's exciting to people. They kind of want to go back to that sense of possibility.
Yes, well, absolutely. And that's good. So with your Substack, have you found the people subscribing has just increased considerably since the project began?
Well, part of the nature of it is that you have these pages like Bleed the Grunge. Manuela is fantastic on that. They have an enormous following. And one day they just get on board and they start pushing your Substack to their thousands and thousands of followers. And then your readership just spikes, because they don't have to go to the bookshop and see if it's in stock. They can tap on the thing and subscribe with their card and they're in. And, they're getting the tapes of someone who they wondered about for. So what it's often come down to, David, is these grunge pages with these enormous followings just suddenly coming on board. And without them, we'd be nowhere. People like Manuela, and they've sent the thing through the roof overnight. You wake up and you're in the top 30 on the Substack chart. I complain about not being in hardback, but it's compensation to some extent. It really is.
And does that continue? I mean, do people just subscribe and then unsubscribe? How does it all work?
Well, yeah, you can unsubscribe as soon as you want, and you would just pay for a month at a time, about $8. So what you could do is you could subscribe for 1 month and read it all in for $8 in 1 month. That would be perfect. what I found people have done is they haven't really unsubscribed. And perhaps it speaks to this sort of community aspect of it, or perhaps it's to Jason's testament that he keeps sharing more and reflections on his sister and more demos. I mean, at one point, he shared on there Kristen's answer phone messages. Crazy that you
Yes.
even have that, But no, people haven't really unsubscribed, and I don't know why. And that's starting to sound like kind of mock vanity, so I don't want to push that point. But no, I would have thought they came in and they came out, and it doesn't really seem to go like that.
Yeah. And is it thousands, tens of thousands? How many? Or is that just a personal question?
No, it's I think about 22,000 reads.
Jesus, that's amazing.
Yeah.
I mean, it's very good sort of advertising, isn't it? Because to be honest, though it's lovely, things are online like PDFs, you just would rather have a hard copy, wouldn't you, really?
Well, I do know what you mean. I'm a book lover. I'm not going to pretend, you don't have a point. I totally am with you on that. It's a lot better than nothing, but it's also quite arbitrary because you go on the screen and it says you've got this number of readers, and as an author, I find that hard to believe. Oh come on, the Substack must be lying to me, and then you realise you've got all these messages, and you think, God, no, it is true. And this person in Brazil has read it, so
Yes.
we're really in a brave new world with it, but I'd be lying if I said I was totally comfortable with it. Probably not.
Yes, I guess you're in a sort of fascinating position, really, aren't you? And
Well,
how was it?
I like shopping for vinyl, and I like finding, a new Dark Star EP that's got 3 B-sides on it, that I can get in the post. It's just, it doesn't sit totally comfortably with me. Yeah.
Yeah, there's something about the work. And did you enjoy doing your TED talk? Was that an interesting experience?
Uh, yeah, it was quite intense. It's when you do these talks, you're just in a live studio, and you get one take, and there's hundreds of people there, and whatever you do, thousands of people are then going to watch it, and it's just one take. You don't get to do another take. I can't cut anything out in the editing, so it was unbelievably intense. And but I think what was good about that is I felt I was starting to get some of the material out there. There's too much me in the TEDx talk and not enough Kristen, but that was how they wanted to do it. They wanted it to be a bit about me and my journey, Tony Blair type thing. But I was starting to shift some material and get some stuff about Kristen and her activism out, and that had not been part of the story at all. So that was quite good, but it was very, very, very intense. Yeah, I didn't sleep at all the night before it.
No, I could imagine. I mean, that is
14
quite.
minutes, yeah, 14 minutes of transcript in my head, and if I get it wrong, my family and friends are in front of me, and it will be on the internet forever, and I don't get to edit it. It's not in your hands at all with them.
And that, dear listener, is basically the end of the interview. A massive thank you to Guy for giving me the time for that. This has been the C86 Show, David Eastaugh. If you want to contact me, you can on those social media platform sites. Just do C86 Show and my name. Also, all these interviews have been archived on Spotify, iTunes, Podbean, and various others. Anyway, have a great week. Stay safe.